When the skies unleash 40 days and nights of relentless deluge, a man named Noah finds himself sealed inside a massive wooden vessel with his family and a cargo of animals whose survival depends entirely on his ability to maintain order within floating chaos. As floodwaters rise to unimaginable heights, submerging mountains and erasing all familiar landmarks, the Ark becomes a self-contained world where the challenges shift from construction to endurance, managing dwindling food supplies, preventing disease outbreaks among packed creatures, maintaining the structural integrity of timber under constant stress, and preserving human sanity when the horizon offers nothing but endless water and the terrible knowledge that everything outside has perished. This is survival not measured in days but in months, adrift on an alien ocean, where hope must be rationed as carefully as grain, and where the greatest threat may not be drowning, but the slow psychological dissolution that comes from existing in a world reduced to wooden walls and the sound of rain that never stops. The rain begins as a whisper, drops falling with irregular rhythm against the pitched roof of the massive wooden structure that has consumed years of Noah's life and the mockery of every neighbor who watched its construction. But within hours, the whisper becomes a roar, a deluge so intense that visibility drops to mere feet, the world beyond the Ark dissolving into gray sheets of water that fall not from clouds, but from the sky itself, as if the firmament has cracked and the waters above are pouring through ruptures in reality. Noah stands at the small window near the top level, watching the rain with an expression that combines vindication and horror. He was right, the warnings were real, but being right means witnessing the drowning of the world, means hearing in his mind the voices of those who laughed at his obsession now screaming as the waters rise with impossible speed. He closes the window, seals it with pitch-soaked cloth, and turns to face the interior of the Ark. This wooden universe that must now sustain life while everything outside surrenders to chaos and death. The Ark itself is a marvel of ancient engineering, though its design came not from Noah's expertise but from specifications he received in visions or divine instruction, dimensions and construction methods that seemed excessive during the building, but now reveal themselves as precisely calibrated for the ordeal ahead. 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high, roughly 450 feet by 75 feet by 45 feet. Creating approximately 95,000 square feet of floor space distributed across 3 levels. The structure is built from gopher wood, whatever species that precisely was, massive timbers joined and reinforced, the entire hull coated inside and out with pitch to create waterproofing that must hold against not just rain, but the hydrostatic pressure of floodwaters that will eventually cover the highest mountains. Noah runs his hands along the beams, feeling for moisture penetration, checking the seams where pitch should seal gaps, knowing that even small leaks compounded over weeks will threaten everything. The animals occupy the majority of the Ark's space, arranged with a logic that prioritizes both their survival and the human's ability to manage them. The lower deck houses the largest creatures, animals whose size makes them impossible to place elsewhere, whose waste production requires proximity to drainage systems Noah has designed, with channels and slopes that should, in theory, allow refuse to flow toward collection points. The middle deck holds medium-sized animals and additional food storage, while the upper deck contains the smaller creatures, the birds in woven cages, and the living quarters for Noah's family. The noise is overwhelming, bleating, roaring, chirping, the sounds of hundreds of species confined in proximity they would never naturally tolerate, their distress at the rising water and the constant rain creating a cacophony that makes sleep difficult and normal conversation nearly impossible. Noah's family, his wife, his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives, divide the labor according to capabilities and necessity, creating shifts that ensure round-the-clock management of the floating menagerie. Feeding times are orchestrated carefully, each species requiring specific sustenance drawn from stores that seemed impossibly vast when loading, but now appear frighteningly finite when calculated against an unknown duration of confinement. Shem manages the herbivores, distributing hay and grain and the dried grasses they stored in massive quantities, rationing carefully because no one knows how long the supplies must last. Ham oversees the carnivores, a more dangerous assignment requiring the distribution of dried meat and fish, the careful approach to creatures whose predatory instincts remain sharp despite confinement, whose hunger makes them unpredictable and potentially lethal to handlers who show weakness or fear.
We must hold out.
Japheth works with his father on the structural integrity of the Ark, a daily inspection that becomes ritual and obsession, checking for leaks, monitoring the stress on joints as the vessel rides increasingly violent waters, applying additional pitch to any seam that shows moisture, tightening ropes and reinforcing supports where the timber creaks and groans under forces it was never meant to endure in static conditions. The Ark was designed to float, not to sail, lacking rudder or oars, its movement entirely at the mercy of currents and winds that develop as the floodwaters create their own weather systems, their own patterns of circulation across a world now transformed into a single, boundless ocean. Noah feels the Ark shudder and shift, riding swells that grow larger as the water deepens and gains the characteristics of open sea. Waves that lift the massive vessel and send it sliding into troughs with stomach-lurching drops that terrify the animals and test every joint in the hull. The women manage water and sanitation, tasks that sound mundane but prove essential to preventing the disease outbreaks that would turn the Ark into a floating tomb. Fresh water for drinking is collected from the rain through systems of channels and barrels, more water than they could possibly need falling from the sky continuously, the one resource that is abundant even as everything else grows scarce. But managing waste from hundreds of animals and 8 humans creates challenges that require constant attention. The drainage channels must be cleared regularly, the collection areas emptied overboard, the living spaces cleaned to prevent the accumulation of filth that breeds disease and creates air quality problems in the enclosed environment. The smell is inescapable, a pervasive combination of animal musk and waste and damp wood and the rain itself, seeping into clothing and hair and becoming the defining sensory characteristic of existence on the Ark. By the 10th day, the rain continues without pause, and the psychological impact begins to manifest in the family's interactions. Short tempers flare over minor issues, someone taking more than their share of bread, someone failing to properly secure a cage, someone expressing doubt about how much longer this can continue. Noah mediates these conflicts with increasing weariness, understanding that they are symptoms of a deeper anxiety that has no easy remedy. They have no way of measuring how high the water has risen, no reference points visible through the small windows that might indicate progress or duration. The world has become an undifferentiated gray expanse of rain and water, the horizon, when it can be glimpsed at all, showing nothing but the same featureless waste in every direction. The psychological impact of this monotony proves as challenging as the physical labor, the mind struggling to maintain equilibrium when every day is identical, when there is no variation to mark time or provide stimulation beyond the routine of feeding and cleaning and repairing. The animals themselves begin showing signs of stress beyond the initial panic. Some refuse to eat, their appetites suppressed by fear or the disruption of their natural environments and rhythms. Noah works with these reluctant feeders individually when possible, coaxing birds to take seed from his hand, offering particularly choice hay to goats that have stopped eating, understanding that if they begin losing animals to starvation or stress-induced illness, the cascade effect could be catastrophic. Other animals become aggressive, their confinement triggering territorial behaviors, or simply the frustration of creatures designed for movement and space now trapped in wooden pens barely large enough to turn around. A lion injures Ham when he gets too close during feeding, the claws raking across his forearm and leaving wounds that his wife must clean and bandage with strips of cloth that should be saved for other purposes, but which now must serve as medical supplies in a situation where every resource is precious and irreplaceable. The 20th day brings a storm that transforms the merely difficult situation into something genuinely terrifying. The rain that has been constant suddenly intensifies, wind developing with speeds that create waves Noah estimates at 20 feet or higher. The Ark riding these mountains of water like a leaf in a torrent, tilting at angles that send unsecured items sliding, that throw animals against the walls of their enclosures, that leave the humans clinging to support beams and praying that the pitch holds and the joints don't separate under the torsional stress. Noah hears timber groaning, sounds that suggest the hull is flexing beyond its design tolerances, and he moves through the lower deck with Japheth, both of them drenched from leaks that have opened in several locations, both of them working frantically to plug the worst breaches with cloth and pitch, applied by hand in conditions that make precision impossible. Water sloshes across the floor, several inches deep, and Noah understands that if they cannot stop the leaks, the accumulation will eventually compromise their buoyancy, the ark settling lower in the water and becoming more vulnerable to swamping by the massive waves. They work through the night, all 8 humans now involved in emergency repairs, bailing water with whatever containers they can find, stuffing cloth into the worst leaks, applying pitch that barely adheres in the wet conditions but which provides at least temporary sealing. The animals panic, their collective terror creating a noise that drowns out even the storm, and Noah shouts to be heard, organizing his family not just to repair damage but to move through the enclosures and attempt to calm the creatures whose survival is their entire purpose. His wife moves among the sheep, speaking in low tones that somehow penetrate the chaos, her presence and touch communicating something that transcends language, reminding the animals at some instinctive level that these humans are providers and protectors, not threats. The storm breaks near dawn, the wind dying as suddenly as it rose, the rain continuing, but the waves gradually subsiding into swells that, while still substantial, no longer threaten to capsize the ark with each passing crest. Noah and Japheth survey the damage in the gray morning light. Several enclosures damaged, requiring reconstruction with limited materials. 3 goats dead, either from injury during the violent pitching or from stress-induced heart failure, and leaks that, while contained, will require ongoing monitoring and repair. The family gathers in exhausted silence, eating a sparse meal of bread and dried fruit, none of them speaking because there are no words adequate to the experience they just survived. No way to articulate the terror of feeling the massive vessel tilting at impossible angles while water pours through breaches in the hull, and the entire project that consumed years of labor teeters on the edge of catastrophic failure. The 30th day marks a subtle shift. The rain continues, but Noah's trained senses detect a diminishment in its intensity, the drops falling slightly less heavily, the visibility extending marginally further, as if the deluge that has been absolute is beginning, almost imperceptibly, to moderate. He shares this observation with no one initially, afraid of generating false hope. But over the following days the trend continues until, by the 40th day, the rain stops entirely, the silence of its absence almost shocking after 6 weeks of continuous noise. The family emerges onto the upper deck, standing in open air for the first time in more than a month, and stares at the world that has replaced the one they knew. Water extends to every horizon, not the chaotic, storm-tossed sea of recent days, but an eerie, calm expanse that reflects the overcast sky, creating the illusion of floating in gray nothingness, suspended between identically featureless zones, with no way to distinguish up from down except by the pull of gravity. But the end of rain does not mean the end of their ordeal. It means only a transition to a different phase of survival. The water must recede, and that process operates on geological timescales that mock human impatience. Weeks pass, then months, marked only by the gradual depletion of their stores and the daily routines that have become mechanical, performed without thought or enthusiasm, simple maintenance of life because the alternative is unthinkable. Noah institutes stricter rationing as he calculates their remaining supplies against an unknowable duration, cutting portions that were already meager, watching his family grow gaunt and the animals lose condition, ribs showing through hides, energy levels dropping to conservation mode where every movement is calculated against its caloric cost. The 150th day brings the first sign of change. The ark shudders and scrapes against something solid, a sound that electrifies the family with hope and terror combined. Have they run aground on a mountain peak emerging as water recedes? Or have they struck debris, some massive fragment of the drowned world that might have damaged their hull? Noah and his sons investigate, feeling carefully along the lower deck for new leaks, finding none, concluding that they have indeed touched land, that somewhere beneath them, the peaks of the mountains are beginning to emerge from the flood. The psychological impact is profound. They are no longer adrift on infinite water, but connected, however tenuously, to solid earth, to the possibility of eventual disembarkation, to the hope that this wooden prison might someday open and release them back into a world transformed but navigable. The water recedes with frustrating slowness, the process visible only through careful daily measurements that Noah makes by lowering a weighted rope from the window and noting how much line deploys before touching water. Inches per day, then feet. The decrease so gradual that individual observations show almost nothing, but accumulated over weeks, revealing genuine progress. The tops of mountains become visible on the horizon, dark shapes emerging from the gray water like islands in an alien sea, and Noah steers toward them. Or rather, positions the ark to catch winds and currents that might drift them closer, still unable to navigate with any precision but no longer entirely passive in their movements. On the 250th day, Noah sends out a raven, releasing it from the window and watching it circle the ark several times before flying toward the distant mountains. The bird does not return, and Noah debates the meaning. Has it found land to settle on? Or has it simply perished from exhaustion over the water? A week later, he sends a dove, watching it disappear into the distance with his heart tight with hope and fear. The dove returns in the evening, having found nowhere to land, and Noah receives it back into the ark with mixed emotions, disappointed, but also relieved that at least they have not lost the bird. Another week, and he sends the dove again, and this time it returns carrying in its beak an olive leaf, freshly plucked, evidence that vegetation is emerging, that the world is beginning its recovery, that the possibility of sustainable life outside the ark is approaching reality rather than remaining distant hope. The preparations for disembarkation begin while they are still waterborne, Noah organizing his family to ready the animals for release, to gather what supplies they will take with them, to plan the reconstruction of life in a world that has been scoured clean of all human presence except themselves. The weight of this responsibility sits heavy. They are the only survivors, the sole repository of human knowledge and culture and genetic diversity, 8 people from whom entire populations must eventually descend. Noah feels the crushing burden of this role, understanding that every decision he makes now will echo through generations, that the world they create as they disembark will shape human civilization in ways he cannot predict or control. The ark finally comes to rest on Mount Ararat, grounded firmly as the water continues its recession, no longer floating, but settled onto solid stone with a permanence that brings both relief and a strange melancholy. This vessel that preserved them through the apocalypse, this wooden world that contained all of life through the months of drowning, will now be abandoned, left to weather and decay on the mountainside as they descend to lower elevations and begin again. Noah walks through the empty enclosures after the animals have been released, his footsteps echoing in spaces that held such crowded life for so long, and he feels the ghosts of the journey, the terror and the tedium and the desperate hope that sustained them through impossibility. The world they emerge into is alien in its emptiness, the familiar landscapes erased, new geography created by the massive erosion and deposition that the flood produced. Soil stripped from some areas and accumulated in others, rivers running in new channels, coastlines redrawn entirely. They find no trace of the civilizations that existed before, no cities, no monuments, no evidence that humans ever built anything permanent. All of it ground to sediment and distributed across the ocean floor or buried under new geological formations. Only stories remain, memories of the world before carried in the minds of 8 survivors, knowledge and history that must be preserved through oral tradition and eventually written record. Noah and his family becoming the living link between the lost world and whatever will emerge in its place. The survival skills that served them on the ark must now be adapted to terrestrial existence, hunting and gathering in a landscape depopulated of large game. Agriculture attempted with seeds preserved from before the flood. Animal husbandry using the breeding pairs they protected through the deluge. Every species of domestic animal and many wild ones exist now only because of the cargo they maintained through months of confinement, making them the most successful conservationists in history, though success came at a cost measured in exhaustion and loss and the psychological scars of surviving when the entire world perished. Noah plants a vineyard in the valleys below Ararat, the first agricultural act in the New World, pressing grapes into wine that he drinks to excess in a moment of weakness or celebration, or the simple, overwhelming need to escape briefly the memories of rain that lasted 40 days, of water that covered mountains, of the sounds of drowning that haunted his dreams during the voyage, and which continue to haunt them in the quiet moments of their new beginning. His sons find him unconscious and naked. The dignity that carried them through the ordeal temporarily dissolved in fermented oblivion, and they cover him with respect and concern, understanding that even the righteous man who was chosen to survive bears wounds that wine can numb but never truly heal. The years that follow are consumed with the work of repopulation and reconstruction. Noah and his wife watching as their sons' families grow, as grandchildren multiply and spread across the recovering landscape, as human civilization begins its second chapter with knowledge inherited from the first, but also with the terrible awareness of how fragile it all is, how quickly everything can be unmade, how survival sometimes requires faith in instructions that seem irrational, until the moment when they prove to be the only thing standing between existence and extinction. Noah lives for centuries according to the ancient records, long enough to see the human population re-establish itself, long enough to become a legend even within his own lifetime. The old man who built the impossible boat and survived the unsurvivable flood, who kept faith when everyone else mocked, and who emerged into a washed world, carrying the seeds of everything that would follow. The ark itself remains on the mountain, too massive to dismantle or move, settling into the landscape and becoming a monument to endurance, its timbers weathering and its pitch cracking, but the basic structure persisting for generations, a physical reminder of the deluge and the survival and the burden of being chosen to continue when all others ended. Pilgrims will climb the mountain in later centuries, seeking fragments of the wood as relics, telling stories that grow increasingly elaborate and distant from the brutal reality of months confined in the stinking, crowded, terrifying vessel, preferring myths of divine provision and miraculous ease to the truth of rationing food and repairing leaks and the constant labor that kept both humans and animals alive through an ordeal that tested every limit of physical and psychological endurance. Noah stands in his vineyard years after the disembarkation, an old man grown older, watching storm clouds gather on the horizon and feeling the ancient terror rise in his chest before reason reasserts itself. There was a promise, a covenant marked by the rainbow, that such destruction would never come again by water. But the scars remain, written into his body by the months of impossible labor, written into his mind by the memories of watching the world drown, written into his soul by the knowledge that survival sometimes comes at the cost of witnessing the death of everything familiar, and that the burden of being preserved when others perish is as heavy as any physical weight he carried on the ark. He has survived, his family has survived, life continues and multiplies and spreads across the renewed earth. But the price of survival was paid in the currency of trauma and loss and the terrible isolation of being among